veterans have been honouring their fallen comrades on the eve of the anniversary of the liberation of the Falkland Islands. Today, Prime Minister David Cameron reaffirmed Britain's support for the islanders and their right to decide their future.
The Falkland Islanders have decided that they're going to hold a referendum to demonstrate that they believe in self-determination. And I think it is so important because Argentina is continually trying to hide this argument and pretend the views of the Falkland Islanders don't matter. They do matter. I hope they will speak loudly and clearly, and Argentina will listen.
But 30 years ago tonight, final victory was just one push away. Forces News has been on the islands throughout the week. Let's join Matt Teal.
We're back in Stanley on the eve of Liberation Day. There are many commemorations and celebrations planned over the next 48 hours, starting with a liberation dance this evening and services of thanksgiving and remembrance tomorrow, followed by a freedom parade and reception. And the memorial to the fallen behind me will take centre stage throughout. But what was it like for the men of 3 Commando Brigade and 5 Division as they fought their way through the mountains? And what was it like in 1982 to be here in Stanley as the onslaught continued?
This was absolute enemy territory in the days leading up to the battle.
These present-day soldiers, based at the Mount Pleasant complex, are here on one of the regular battlefield tours that are run from the base. It's important for today's servicemen to understand what happened here 30 years ago and the strategy which led to the liberation of the islands.
We're just trying to give them a sense of what it would have been like to have been here fighting 30 years ago. And it really helps them to appreciate what was sacrificed by the guys, what conditions they went through.
The battle on Mount Harriet is regarded as a textbook example of good planning and use of deception and surprise undertaken by 4-2 Commando Royal Marines. The Falklands terrain is not the easiest to negotiate, even in daylight. The Marines were doing it in the dark and under fire.
All them slippery rocks and that to try and get over, and and there'll be constant obstacles all the way up the hill, and of course everything was done in the dark.
In a fierce night attack, 4-2 Commando set about winkling out the entrenched positions of the 4th Argentine Infantry Brigade. Argentine Forces had been dug in on the mountain for weeks, that is until the 11th of June 1982. And even after 30 years, the remnants of war are still here. On the other side of the mountains in Stanley, islanders were bracing themselves for the final British push. Hundreds of shells whistled and screamed over the town for hours on end. 30 years ago last night, a shell from HMS Avenger fell short of its target and hit this house behind me. Inside were a number of families taking shelter, and Susan Whitley, Doreen Bonner and Mary Goodwin were killed. They were the only 3 islanders to die in the conflict.
I think we knew that the end was inevitable, but we were also aware that it was probably the most dangerous point of the conflict, and we were nervous. And it was indeed the most dangerous point of the conflict because the naval shelling and the Harrier attacks were getting closer and closer to the centre of Stanley.
One Stanley resident described these few days 30 years ago as like being at the very centre of hell itself.
I know there are many times when I thought if we're here by lunchtime we're going to be jolly lucky, because we were at that time in the centre of the town. We had the British artillery firing from the mountains into Stanley, the RAF overhead with the Royal Navy dropping bombs on Stanley, the Royal Navy just off the coast firing at Stanley, and the Argentines in Stanley firing outwards.
The memorial on the top of Mount Harriet is one of a number which testifies to the bravery and fortitude of the liberating British troops. Today's troops like to maintain it when they come, giving the plaque a rigorous polish. And one lays a wreath for one of the 2 Marines who were killed in the battle. The respect for what was done here is tangible.
Well, obviously we had the greatest respect for the guys that carried out the actions during the conflict at the time, and experiencing the conditions that they must have had at the time in these cold weather conditions. You actually feel for the guys that took part of it.
The history of what happened, sort of lives on, and a lot of the younger guys that don't know get taught by the senior guys in the battery or by their detachment commanders. So we're lucky in the sense that we're always here, so we're always learning more history about what happened in different battlefields.
I think my first word would be humbling. The courage, the just sheer grit that must have been in them to do what they've done. As we've just been walking across the area, you know, it's so uneven, you can't always see where you're going.
31 British troops were killed and 79 were injured in the last 2 days of fighting on these mountains just outside Stanley. Despite a fierce fight here, 4-2 Commando only lost 2 Marines in the battle for Mount Harriet. Now, there's been a museum here in Stanley pretty much since the Falklands War, but they've just opened a new exhibition about the conflict, which is so large they've had to move it into the town hall. One of the trustees, Richard Cockwell, agreed to show me around.
This exhibition is to show anybody who comes to the Falklands, and also for Falkland Islanders to see, stuff which went on right through the war, not only from the military side, I think that's been covered fairly well, but also from the civilian side, and what happened to civilians. We've got things like this letter from this girl who wrote to her parents. She was at school in Stanley, and she says here, "I hope the British ships come soon. We're not allowed out of our houses," and it's really quite, it gets
personal,
you
aren't
back,
they?
very personal.
The first Argentine ships have been sighted.
Richard, explain to us what we're listening to.
This is one of the rediffusion boxes. That every house in Stanley had a box, and it was wired into the radio station. It was also broadcast on the radio. But this is recordings of Pat Watts and various other people made during the invasion, actually while the invasion was taking place. The governor's talking. It's really quite...
it's eerie, isn't it, almost?
Very eerie, takes you back. It's not something I like to listen to for too long. It was very emotional at the time, and I still find it coming back occasionally.
I'm not going up to talk to them or to surrender to them.
Richard, explain the significance of the doll we have in front of us here.
This was at Fox Bay, where I was. A helicopter came in with 14 people from Stanley, including Lillian Wallace here and their small daughter. And they were all put in our house together. We were all basically under house arrest. And Lillian didn't have any toys for her daughter, so she got some material from around the house and made this lovely rag doll. And there it is still.
And the house that you're talking about, your house, is the one up here?
This is an aerial photograph taken by the British, actually. This was the Bahia Buen Suceso, a ship which is used to bring in a lot of ammunition, huge quantities of mines and everything else.
And your house is that one?
And that's our house there.
So why does it say...
Well, because the Argentines, they took all the flags down except the one that they put outside our house. Obviously, the British thought that this was the Argentine headquarters. So we painted civilian down the side of the houses and put children's clothes and women's underwear on the washing line to try and show that it was actually civilians there and not military.
And Richard, this is the surrender document?
This is a copy of the original surrender document signed by Menendez and Jeremy Moore. Jeremy Moore was obviously, as everybody knows, was the commander of the British land forces.
I think what contrasts well is you've got the obviously official military document there, but below it, this is a collection of essays from school children at the time, isn't it?
Yeah, this is brilliant.
I mean, this one here, this was written on the 30th of June 1982. I'm thinking of the most frightening thing that has happened to me in the last 12 weeks of the occupation. Lower down he talks about just going to let my dog off the chain when I was told to get down. There was a foxhole half full with mud and water. I had to get in to get under cover. I saw a missile blow up a Skyhawk. When it finished, I went home and told my dad where I was, which is quite sobering stuff to read.
It's quite something, isn't it?
Particularly under that document there,
yes,
really. It kind of brings it all home.
Yeah, it does.
And I guess that is partly what this exhibition is all about.
It's what it's all about. It's to try and link the sort of the military exercise and the civilians at the same time. When it was over, you know, the reality came of people been dying for us, and it was all rather difficult. And I must say, I didn't talk about it for quite a while, but I'm perfectly happy to talk about it now. But we still do remember the people who died for us, and we are extremely grateful to everybody.
Well, that's just about it from the Falklands for now. As I mentioned earlier, it is of course Liberation Day tomorrow. We'll be bringing you a flavour of that on the programme. We'll also be meeting some children from Stanley Junior School who've been doing projects on the conflict. That's tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.